Welcome to the next video in the series. The last one that I did, I promised that I was going to do one on Italy. And it's important because with the Brexit fiasco of this week, or non-Brexit, Italy's been pretty well put in the back burner of the public spotlight, and especially the European spotlight. But make no mistake about it, Italy's a much bigger problem than England ever could be, or the United Kingdom ever could be. And why is this so? It's because the Italian problem hasn't gone away, and it's not likely to go away in any stage in the future. I would actually say, and I would go as far as to say, that if we were looking at a comparative sort of analysis, I would say that the Brexit process, as far as the EU is concerned, is more like a cough, whereas an Italexit is terminal cancer. It'll be the death of the euro and the death of the European experiment as well. And some people will be happy with that. As far as I'm concerned, I'm neutral. But it does pose some interesting investment scenarios going forward and strategies that one has to be aware of. Now, if we have a look at the following slide, we can see that, and I know I've covered this before in a previous video. If we actually look, we can see that there are some similarities, and I need to go over this. I need to go over some sort of comparison, a couple of minutes comparison between the United Kingdom and Italy, because I want to prove and show why Brexit is not such an issue as far as the EU is concerned as Italy is concerned as far as the future of the EU is concerned. Now, I'm not denigrating the importance of Brexit. What I'm actually accentuating is the importance of Italexit, not just for the European Union, but for the global economy. So let's just have a look at this particular slide here. And as I said, I've gone over it before in other videos. We're talking about 2.3 trillion of debt, Italian debt. It's number one as far as the European Union is concerned. And Britain's number 4 on the table, which is behind France and Germany at just over 2 trillion. That's not a small number, but considering that the population of the United Kingdom is 70 million, and the population of Italy 60 million, and the demographics, which I'll cover in another video, are extremely important going forward on this. Italy is in certainly a very poor position as far as this debt's concerned. Now, in the next slide, what I want to do is, this is an article from Bloomberg, and it's been written by Giovanni Salzano, Demetrius Podcasts, and Ben Sills, and it's an article that was written in the 4th of February of this year, 2019. And it basically says why Italy's debts are Europe's big problem. And let me read this to you because it's very important. It says, Europe's most dangerous stock of public borrowing, some 1.5 trillion euros, $1.5 trillion, is concentrated in the balance sheets of Rome and Milan. But a rout could quickly sweep in lenders in Frankfurt, Paris and Madrid. And I'll certainly be going over this later on in this video. It's extremely important when we consider contagion, risk and bank closures, effectively. The main banks in the rest of Europe are holding more than 425 billion euros of sovereign and private Italian debt, based on a Bloomberg analysis of the European Banking Authority data. So Bloomberg is highlighting basically what I've been saying, but I've been saying this all along, that there are mainstream publications, not necessarily the mainstream media, which is different, but the mainstream financial publications are certainly highlighting this particular problem. Now, what is of little knowledge is the extent that Italian banks are exposed to this terrible situation. And we have a slide from an interesting article by Wall Street Economics earlier on that basically shows which countries are on the hook as far as Italian debt's concerned. Now, I'm bringing this up because the whole point of this video is to show that Italy's problems are not going to be concentrated on Italy alone, and in fact the recipients of the meltdown potentially of the Italian economy and banking sector is going to be felt by other European nations, and in particular, look at these figures. We've got France. France is on the hook to Italian debt to the tune of $285 billion. Euros, actually. Euros. So that's an incredible amount. And what we have is, we have French banks, in particular BNP Paribas, which has got exposure to over half of that. Now, when I say exposure, I'm talking about loans that have been made to the Italian government via sovereign loans. But on the balance sheet of BNP Paribas, we have 16 billion of debt. Now, let me explain. This is important going forward later, and it's very important in terms of the core equity, the tier capital 1 of the banks. And this is really, really important. We can see Credit Agricole, 97 billion euros. So we've got 285 billion euros when we look down this chart. It's absolutely frightening. Germany, for example, is only 58 billion. So Germany is 1/5 the exposure to bad Italian debt that France has. So any tremor in the Italian debt is going to cause an earthquake in the French banking system, and that really should be of concern to most investors. Now, let's look at this here. This is the article. This is an article from Wolf Street that I referred to just about a minute ago, and it says which banks are most exposed to Italy's sovereign debt. And look at the title in brackets. Other than horribly exposed Italian banks. We're going to go over that in a minute or two, why that's the case. But look, the 3 key words: risk, exposure, contagion. Now, in the next slide of this article, let me go over this, and there's quite a bit of reading in this. So bear with me, because everything that I'm saying is of absolute importance going forward. So, a recent study by the Bank of International Settlements. Remember BIS, one of the major well, it is the major bank as far as central banks, etc., are concerned. And it shows Italian government debt represents nearly 20% of Italian banks' assets, one of the highest levels in the world. In total, there are 10 banks with Italian sovereign debt holdings that represent over 100% of their Tier 1 capital, which is used to measure bank solvency. And you remember I've said in previous videos, this system is gamed, and this is just confirmation of that going forward. Which is used to measure bank solvency, according to research by Eric Dorr, the Director of Economic Studies at IESEG School of Management. Now, the next paragraph, the list includes Italy's 2 largest banks, lenders, UniCredit and Intesa Sanpaolo, whose exposure to Italian government bonds represents the equivalent of 145% of their Tier 1 capital. Also listed are Italy's 3rd largest bank, Banco BPM, 327%. Think of it, 327% of Tier 1 capital. Monte dei Paschi di Siena, which is, by the way, the oldest bank in the world, 206%, and BPER Banca, 176%, and Banca Carige, 151%. Those are astounding figures. Those are terrible figures. So if we go on to the next paragraph, it talks about this thing called the doom loop, and basically it's like a cycle of disaster once everything starts to unwind. And let me read this out to you. The doom loop is when weakening government bonds threaten to topple the banks that own the bonds, and in turn the banks start offloading them, which causes these bonds to fall further, thus pushing the government to the brink. The doom loop is a particular problem in the eurozone, since a member state doesn't control its own currency and cannot print itself out of trouble, which leaves it exposed to credit risk. But it's not just Italian banks that are heavily exposed to Italian debt. So too are French lenders, which I've covered before, which last year had combined holdings of Italian bonds worth 44 billion euros. This goes back to the 16 billion euros I talked on BNP's balance sheets in its Tier 1 capital. And that's according to the European Banking Authority's 2017 transparency exercise. And Spanish banks had 29 billion. And Spanish banks aren't in the best condition either, which I'm going to show. So the 3rd page of this goes on. And it says BNP Paribas, France's largest bank, as I said before, 16 billion. And Dexia, which is a Belgian bank, which has had to be bailed out twice, 2008 and 2011, has 15 billion. On their Tier 1 capital balance sheets. And Banco Sabadell, which owns TSB in the UK, is in hock for 10.5 on their balance sheets, and that's TSB has been weakening over the past year, as a lot of depositors have, I wouldn't say they've woken up to the problem, but they're finding that it's probably not a great bank for them to be in, as are many banks. It's not the only bank. So just quoting this again, with the data from the European Banking Authority, we estimate that the lenders that would suffer the greatest impact of a new Italian debt crisis, so they're not ruling it out, are UniCredit, Sabadell and Intesa Sanpaolo. Analysts from RBC Capital Management recently warned. And then it goes on to say, to make matters worse, another third of Sabadell's fixed asset portfolio is invested in Spanish bonds. They're also losing value, partly as a result of the contagion effect from Italy, but also due to rising domestic political stability. And I've mentioned that before in regards to what has been happening with the separatist movement in Catalonia, in the southwest part of Spain. So this slide here goes back now to individual Italian banks' exposure. Now we've said like BNP's got 16 billion, Derci has got close to 15 billion, and we have Sabadell, Banco Sabadell, 10.5 billion. But what about the Italian banks? Well, from this Doom Loop article as well, we have UniCredit. This is why we talked about the risks of UniCredit, 66 billion. Now, why is that number significant? Because let's look what happened in the last crisis. When RBS went down, the government had to bail it out to the tune of 64 billion. And that still wasn't enough. We had Lloyd's TSB at 36 billion. It was 100 billion, but the UK government had to add close to 850 billion of liquidity into the system to make sure it stayed liquid. And we have got much more than that bank. Look, we've got UniCredit at 66.3 billion, and we've got Intesa Sanpaolo at 47.3 billion, and then we've got Banco Monte dei Paschi di Siena, 25 billion, and Banco BPM, 20.5 billion. So you can see that this is adding up to an absolutely unbelievable fiasco that's going to potentially come forward. Now, this is something that cannot be avoided. The Italian banks pose the greatest risk to the euro that we currently see at the moment, and it just cannot be ignored. At the end of the day, what we're going to see is we're going to see mass potential bank failures on the basis of this Italian sovereign debt. This goes back to the sovereign debt problems that I've been mentioning before. And no, as I said, Brexit, it's a joke. It's a joke comparison to what's going on in Italy at the moment. And then, of course, if Italy falls, then we have the domino effect, and then that's it, basically. Now, there is another slide that I want to show you, basically, and what it is again outlining the what I call the gaming, as I mentioned before a few minutes ago, of the Tier 1 capital side of things. And let's just have a look at this slide. We have Iccrea Banca, an Italian bank, okay? Percent of Tier 1 capital exposure in Italian bonds, 620%. Right? Société de Financement Local, it's France, 482%. Banco Popolare di Sondrio, Italy, 341%. Banco BPM, which I mentioned just in the last breath, Italy, 327%. Dexia, remember the 15 billion on their balance sheet? Belgium, 320% of their Tier 1 capital. So the Tier 1 capital is supposed to protect them under the Basel III Accord, and it's been gamed. It's been gamed alone on the on these sovereign bonds. You know, and the other thing that I mentioned about Italy, which hasn't been raised either, is this is on top of the non-performing loans, which is almost $1 trillion worth. Italy, as I say, Italy's a complete joke. Italy's a complete mess. It's the canary in the coal mine. No wonder the EU is trying to divert attention across to Brexit. Because if they actually focused on the real problem, which is Italy, and then potentially Spain and the fallout from that, and France in particular, I mean, it's a disaster. But another thing that I want to actually go back to prove this whole point is here's an article from the London School of Economics as well. And they've basically said, Italy under the spotlight of another financial crisis. Oh, big surprise there. And what it says is, just reading this last paragraph, the transmission channel, and this is really important, the transmission channel of a possible new crisis is still the banking sector because of the sovereign bank link, which has effectively remained in place since the last crisis. This is LSE, London School of Economics. I'd say the best economic school in the world, really, in my view. I'm not biased, by the way. Okay, the last sheet I'm going to read again comes from this Bloomberg article that I alluded to earlier. And let me read it. Europe's existing, and this is where it's scary, Europe's existing rescue mechanisms were bolted together on the fly during the last debt crisis. And it's the next paragraph. But Draghi will be gone this year and Merkel's power is on the wane. What's worse, Italy's financing requirements would exhaust the existing capacity of the European Stability Mechanism bailout funds, or 410 billion euros in just a year. It's going to be much more than that because of the other crises that I've said. And then basically that would leave the next generation of European leaders once again weighing the cost of holding their monetary union together. This is why I think if Italy goes down, and the facts are starting to scream, it's going to bring the whole euro project down. So Brexit is not harming the euro. It's just saying a different currency. It's their banks, if they go down, it's a British problem. Italy's banks go down, and the Italy's economy, the whole financial system go down. It's not only Europe's problem, it's a global problem, and this is where the crisis, as I've said before, could be very, very likely to occur. So I know it's enough of scare tactics, but we may not be necessarily facing a recession where Italy's gone into recession. We could be facing a crash, and I hope we don't. We've got to often prepare for the worst case scenario, but let's just hope that we get a mild recession and somehow we can pedal our way through this. But the figures don't look good for Italy. They just don't look good. And nothing, as these articles have said, has been changed since the last crisis in 2011. It's called fudge economics, and the EU and the ECB are magicians at this. So beware, there is the biggest canary in the coal mine that ever existed is Italy. And it's no wonder the mainstream media, rather than panic everybody, is not covering this. So sorry to be a little bit more doom and gloom, but I think this had to be covered. And the next video that I'm going to do is going to be on Brexit again, because there has been some developments, but it's just more of a summary of options and things like that that need to be considered before we move forward to some other topics which I want to cover. So thank you again for watching this video. And by the way, tomorrow's St. Patrick's Day, so for all you guys out there that like green beer, I hope you have a really pleasant St. Patrick's Day. Thank you again for watching this video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thank you, and bye.